Hey everybody. So I wanted to tell you about my audiobook that I just finished for the month of May, and that was called The Age of Light by Whitney Scharer. So this is historical fiction, and I wasn't a huge fan of the narrator. Her way of speaking was quite breathy, and I just don't like that way of speaking. I got used to it, and it didn't bother me enough that I would DNF it, but it wasn't I wouldn't say I enjoyed her narration specifically. So this is a historical fiction novel written about the American photographer Lee Miller. And she went to Paris in the 1920s and became an apprentice to the artist Man Ray. So she was originally a model and was very interested in photography. Her father had been a photographer. She was very interested in being a photographer more than a model. But kind of modeling was kind of her gateway into becoming a photographer. And she worked as Man Ray's assistant and also was his girlfriend. They lived together and were together for quite a few years, I guess. So overall, I enjoyed the novel. I learned a lot. I'm not exactly sure what the author embellished, what was, facts, what was fiction, what she made up, what she added in. So I'm interested enough in Lee Miller to read a biography about her, and I'm very excited to see the film that's been made about her starring Kate Winslet. But I will say that, just on the cursory research I did after reading, Lee Miller had a child, which I find interesting because there was no child referenced as far as I know in the novel. And I feel like she did reference 3 periods of Lee's life, and one of which was the end of her life. The epilogue is kind of her, resolving that she's dying. And I thought, you don't mention something as significant as having a child in a novel. And that's because the author chose to focus on the love affair between Man Ray and Lee Miller. That was the main crux of the novel. And I think that is a typical focus for this style of novel, which I think was kind of contemporary fiction style-esque, where there were spicy scenes between Lee and several of her lovers. It was about her feelings, jealousy, love, desire, the relationship conflicts that happen between people. I did think that the novel did a good job of showing the tension between an artist a woman trying to be an artist in the early 20th century and being a muse at the same time, and that kind of tension between the two. And that was actually very well documented in the historical fiction novel that I read about Leonora Carrington as well. So I thought there was some parallel there between the 2 novels. The other one is Leonora and the Morning Light. Don't remember the author, but we'll put her name here. And that also focused on a very specific period of Leonora Carrington's life, which was her relationship with Max Ernst. So I think that, for contemporary fiction readers, they want to focus on the romance. I was more interested in her artistic part. So she has her kind of romance with Man Ray as one section. Then she has Lee as a kind of alcoholic, jaded, washed up kind of writer for Vogue in the I believe that would have been in the late 50s, early 60s. I'm not exactly sure. She does say the dates in it, but of course, when you're listening to dates, I don't find I retain dates as well when I'm listening to them as I do when I read them on the page. And then the other period of time that she had little snippets from, and they were very much smaller vignettes, was World War II, because Lee Miller was a war photographer, and she was a media correspondent for Vogue magazine, sending back stories. And she was actually one of the first photographers of the concentration camps. She went in there and she saw obviously terrible things. And so she was, she's a really significant war photographer on the front lines of the human tragedy of World War II. So, overall, I thought that the book had lots of merits, and it was really, it definitely made me want to read more about Lee Miller and understand, the truth behind the novel. But there were parts of it that I found kind of tedious and frustrating, because I think that I wasn't exactly sure why the author chose the moments she chose to share. And also, I think that Lee's evolution as an artist, like, she basically showed her budding into becoming an artist, mentored and in a relationship with Man Ray. And I feel like it may have been more interesting to show her post Man Ray. But again, a lot of people want the romance, and I'm just a little bit different than that. I'm not as interested in romance. I'm more interested in the development of the character, of her artistic character and her artistic collaborations, which is showed quite a bit because she also was in a Jean Cocteau film. So she was very influential at the time in Paris in the late 20s, early 30s. So yes, so have a read of The Age of Light if you find that interesting. But like I said, there were a few flaws in it for me. I will check in again when I have finished another book. Hey everyone, so I have finished Exit West by Mohsin Hamid. This was my second read of this book. The first time I read it, I listened to it on audio in 2019, and this is part of my 4 rereads for 2024. So I am a big fan of Mohsin Hamid, and I don't know why he is a controversial or kind of a Marmite author. I think it might be because he's very unapologetic in his way of presenting, politics and ideas from his perspective. And I think that people find that off-putting, and I don't know why, because there's many other authors who do the same thing, and they seem to enjoy that from them, but not as much from Mohsin Hamid. I'm not sure why, but I have read now 2 of his books, and one of them twice, and I think he is one of my favorite writers, and I think that this is a really brilliant novel. And what I find so amazing about it, reading it the second time, is that this was published in 2017, I believe. I'm just going to double check that. Yeah, 2017. And this book remains so relevant and so important in the ideas that it is presenting. And it presents it in this very personal and touching story. So you have Nadia and Saeed. They are in an unidentified Middle Eastern city, and they are facing a militant takeover of the city. No one says why. And I think maybe that is a concern, because there's some people who read these types of stories and they need a lot of explanation. They need a lot of background. They need a lot of, well, why is there a conflict? What is happening? Who's battling who in this conflict? And for me as a reader and as a watcher, and it's the same thing in films, that's not always necessary. I think that people get caught up sometimes in little details that are actually not important to the main point of the story. And that is the case here. We don't need to know why this is happening. We just know it is happening. And because people don't often know these answers in the moment when these types of conflicts are happening, okay? It's not like you're in the middle of a conflict zone and you know everything going on both sides, and you know who's in the right and who's in the wrong and where you stand on the issues as they're happening. That doesn't happen for a lot of people when they're in a conflict zone. You are just trying to survive. You are just trying to figure out a way to not get wrapped up in the violence or get pulled into something like that's going to hurt you or the ones you love. That is a reality for so many people. And I think that it is such a realistic reality to present because it doesn't end up always coming down to this right or wrong thing. It often comes down to surviving. And that's what Saeed and Nadia do. They have a love story. They fall in love, but they're young, and they are limited by this conflict happening in their city. And simultaneously, as this is happening, this conflict, these doors start opening, and these doors can transport you from one place to another. And there's no explanation of why this is happening, and you don't need an explanation. That's not what it's about. The fact that this is happening changes the world. It changes everything, because now there is no way for governments to control borders. There's no way to prevent people from coming in and out. They try to militarize these doorways. They try to prevent people from going through them. They try to detain people when they come through, but they start popping up everywhere, and they pop up too quickly for them to be contained and controlled by governments at borders. And so what ends up happening is that eventually they have to rethink the way we've organized the world. The world no longer works with borders and governments controlling entry and exit. It doesn't work that way anymore. And so they have to adapt. And so the world changes. And Nadia and Saeed experience this change, and you experience it alongside them as they move to several different places through these doors, and as they evolve as humans to become global citizens. And you also get tiny snippets of other experiences that are affected by the doors. So you don't get deep backstories of these other characters. They're just smaller little anecdotes that happen usually at the end of a chapter. So you'll find out about what's happening with why do I keep saying Nadia and Saeed. And then you will hear another little anecdote of someone's life who has been affected by the doors. And most often they're positive effects. And so there's a sense of hopefulness in this novel. There's a sense of what could happen. It's kind of a what if scenario. What if this changed the way we look at the world? What if this changed humanity? What if our world changed our values and other things that controlled us before no longer could control us, and we had to adapt to this new way of existing? And that's what this is. And I just find it's still so relevant, because people are still being displaced. People are still being, denied entry or deported or controlled by their governments, and their movements are being controlled. And so there's this sense of hopefulness in this novel that I find very uplifting, because I think about what would the world be like if we couldn't control people the way we do through borders and through governments, and if we had to adapt to us all just being a collective humanity. And so that's what this is about. And it's also the very personal story between Saeed and Nadia, and their love, and how it changes and evolves, and how they grow up as people, and how a conflict forces them to couple up to survive. But then they evolve through that, and it changes into something else. And it's just a very human story. It's a very beautiful, simple, but also very layered love story that evolves and changes and is very mature. And there's not a lot of drama in it. which is, my preference. I prefer that. And so it's such a small little book and it has so much in it. So I'm really glad that I reread it. It was a very different experience to read it, actually, than to listen to it, because I remember when I listened to it, there was a lyricalness to the prose that I didn't really pick up as much in the second time through. There were some lovely passages and lovely ideas, but they didn't hit me the same way as they did when I listened to it on audio the first time. So I thought that was really interesting. And yeah, I'm very glad I read this again. Mohsin Hamid released a new novel last year, so I'll definitely be reading that. And I do want to read the rest of his backlist as well, because his books are, to me, just a super important perspective that continues to expand my brain and push me, and I really just enjoy his writing style. There's a sparseness to it, but it's also very deliberately sparse, but it's not too sparse, and it's just, I just really enjoy his writing. So that is Exit West by Mohsin Hamid, and I will check in again with you when I have finished another book.